Good day, Internet. Chavez and Valko here with an immigration update. And you know that when you see Andrew and I, that we are here to talk about all things employment-based immigration. And today, being that is the month of March, of course, the thing we're here to talk about is H-1Bs, because that is what is on everybody's mind during this season. We're going to talk about the current registration, last year's cap, and the H-1B class action lawsuit challenging the registration system. So let's just jump right into it. Andrew, FY 2023 is open. So when are we able to register?
Right now, all the way through the 18th at noon Eastern time. Don't put it off to the last minute. Just do it in the next week or so here.
Who can register somebody? Can I register myself if I'm an employee?
Absolutely not. The company is the one that needs to be doing the registration. So essentially, all the company's going to put up or have a My USCIS account, register their employees through there with just basically name, passport number, things of that nature.
Yeah, so obviously the company can link their account to an attorney, and the attorney can do it for the company. So it's either the company, the attorney, the individual cannot. The only cost, other than if you're paying a legal fee to an attorney, is $10. I've seen some confusion about, well, there's all these filing fees. You don't pay the filing fees unless you're selected and submit your full petition. So it's really just $10. I see issues with, oh, but my company's asking me for all these documents, and I don't know if I can produce them in time. While your company or the attorney wants to see all the documents, right? Really, in order to analyze the case, they want to make sure you qualify before they submit the registration. They don't actually need it to submit the registration. Really, the only thing they need is your passport and then the yes, no to do you have a US master's degree? That's it. I saw another interesting question today. Again, seeing all these questions on Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, where people are getting pushback or confusion from employers. Again, one about the fees. Again, just $10 for now. Who can register? Another, some more confusion I've seen is about the master's cap, where, well, will my company register for my master's cap? Does the master's cap have anything to do with the actual position, the prevailing wage, all that stuff that comes after?
No, the U.S. Masters is just has to be a U.S. Masters. You can even use a separate degree that actually qualifies for the position. Say, you have your bachelor's in computer science, and then you got a master's in English for some reason. Well, you still have a U.S. Masters, and then they would use the bachelor's degree to actually relate to the position.
Yeah, so if you actually get selected and you're looking at the prevailing wage, that's based on the SOC code and location and requirements of the position, which actually have nothing to do with the master's degree. Yeah, like you said, I could have a bachelor's in computer science, which is what I'm using as basis to qualify for this position, but I also so happen to have a master's in something completely unrelated. So the master's cap question is just a yes, no. Do they have a US master's? It doesn't have to be related to the position. It doesn't have to be a factor in terms of what the prevailing wage. They're totally separate things, right? So an employer shouldn't be worried about, well, if I check yes to this, it's going to cost me more money. No, they're totally separate things, right? So this person can have a master's that gets them into the master's cap, but then the position you're offering them only require a bachelor's, right? That's totally separate things. Don't worry about it. So again, you have until the 18th, noon Eastern time. It's really important because I've seen the last 2 years people get burned by that, where they're just like, oh, I have until the end of the day, right? No, noon Eastern time. It's done by the company. They have to create a my USCIS account. Again, if they're doing it through an attorney, they link their account to the attorney, pay $10. Basically, you need the passport. Simple yes, no. Again, there's the good and the bad. The good is that, hey, it's actually quite simple, quite inexpensive. Of course, the downside is that can also lead to a lot of fraud, which is something we're going to talk about here in just a second. But registration is currently open. Now, got to talk about last year's cap. What happened with last year's cap?
Well, last year's cap, they repeatedly opened up new caps or more selections, and then recently they have closed the cap. So, according to USCIS, they are no longer issuing H-1Bs for fiscal year 2022.
Yes, I mean they're still going to issue the ones they received in to the third lottery, right? It's just that there will be no fourth lottery, right? So they did a
Right.
first, a second, and a third, and we were all thinking that there was probably going to be a fourth, just based on the numbers we had. We were kind of looking, looking at the numbers and thinking, there's probably going to be a fourth round, and that fourth round would be anywhere from 5 to maybe 10,000 people. And then they come out on the 28th, the day before the next year's registration opens up, and they're like, "Now we're done." So what gives, right? It's like, do we believe they actually got 85,000 applications? Because that's the key here. It's not how many people registered and not how many people were selected, but how many people actually submitted their H-1B petition. And again, so if they selected 130,000 people, well, that's more than 85,000, but did 85,000 actually submit their H-1B petition? And of course, we have the question of, did they really get 85,000, or is there something weird going on here? So, Andrew, just off the top of your head, no inside information, no data. What do you think? Do you think they actually got 85,000 or no?
Um, I would hope so because I feel like it would be a huge mess for them if they didn't. I know you don't think they did, but I feel like sooner or later the information is going to come out that you didn't distribute the 85,000 that you are required to. And I'm pretty sure with a lot of the litigation we've seen over the last couple of years, that if any real interested party got wind that you didn't issue all the visas or all the H-1Bs that you're required to, I mean, ultimately, you could imagine it being a massive lawsuit.
Yeah, and we're seeing this right now with the diversity lottery class action lawsuit, right? Where, they have to issue those visas by the end of the fiscal year. And if they don't, they just go away. Well, of course, in 2020, 2021, the embassies were closed and they just sat on them. So you had all these people that got selected and then got screwed through no fault of their own. It wasn't like they submitted their case late. It's just the embassies refused to interview anybody. And there, these the ongoing class action lawsuits to saying, well, no, you should those numbers shouldn't just disappear. They should carry over the next year, at least in this kind of special use case, right? Of the pandemic. Again, when we ran our numbers, we know for a fact that the first round they overselected by 3%. And that makes sense because that accounts for their average denial rate, meaning they did not account for duplicate registrations at all in the first round. They only accounted for their denial rate. And so then we assumed on the second and third round they'd have about the same over selection rate. And then based on that, we figured they would need 5 to 10,000 in a fourth round. Now, it could very well be that in rounds 2 and 3, they increased their over selection significantly. They saw that, hey, the return rate on round 1 was around 69%. And so maybe they increased their over selection to account for that in the second and third round. We don't know because they don't release any freaking numbers, at least not until they get FOIA'd and sued and all of that. So maybe they did hit the cap because they were over selecting more in the second or third round. There's also a lot of people that suspect that the USCIS software is not built to handle 2 concurrent cap seasons, and that literally they may have closed the cap the day before because they had no choice. If they didn't, the system would break essentially, which is pretty. I mean, it's 2022 and we're still filing paper H-1Bs. I mean, that should tell you where they are technological and if they're tech. But there is a lot of suspicion that they may have not gotten enough and they just closed it down because they had no choice. If they didn't, then FY 2023 would have just been a complete nightmare.
I mean, on that
But
note, wasn't it about 2019 when the H-2B registration system crashed due to the number of applications that they had received?
I mean, I don't remember that off the top of my head, but maybe. Um, So the key thing is that if you were waiting for a fourth round, as of right now, it's done. It's over. It's not going to
Yeah.
happen. So if you were not selected in the first three rounds, well, guess what? The new year is is available, so you can just go re-register yourself. That's an important thing. Registrations do not carry over year to year. So if you were not selected, your company has to re-register you. Right? Again, good thing is it only costs $10, but they do have to re-register you. Now, another thing actually I forgot to mention, another question I've seen pop up, this relates more to the first issue of the current registration. I see a lot of people asking the question of, well, since it's done by my employer or their attorney, how do I know that I was actually registered? Like maybe they're just pulling my chain here, trying to keep me happy, uh, but they don't really want to fork out the money. How wouldn't or what could the individual request from their employer or the attorney to know they were registered?
There is, I mean, you can print the registration after you've submitted it.
Yeah, it actually generates a PDF. So when they go, well, first off, they could just screenshot their My USCIS account and you would see your name and all that. But actually, on the
Right.
side, it generates a little registration PDF that you can click on and then send to somebody and show, no, look, here you go. Like you're actually registered. Then, of course, if you're selected, it creates a new PDF that you can, that you need. But yeah, it actually creates a little registration PDF that you could potentially ask your employer to send you um, as evidence that you were in fact registered. Okay, so 2022 is over. 2023 is just getting started, but there was this class action lawsuit that started last year, right, where a bunch of people who were not selected sued the government to try to throw out the registration rule. Um, there was a lot of high hopes there that they would side with the plaintiffs and it would stop the cap before it even happened. Of course, that didn't happen, and now we actually got the decision. And unfortunately, the federal district court sided with the government and granted their motion, or they denied the plaintiff's motion for summary judgment and granted the cross motion for summary judgment by the defendants, which is the government in this case. Um, in the end, there was three main issues. Right, the first issue was standing. Andrew, what's standing?
Standing is essentially, do you have the right to bring the complaint? It's a part of, make me go back to law school here. Essentially, I can't sue on behalf of, oh, you did something wrong to Joe. Something has to be done wrong to me for me to go and sue. This is the real basic version, I think.
Oh, it's like, oh, there was a Tesla had one of their cars malfunctioned and crashed, or I'm gonna go sue Tesla, and of course we're gonna be like, well, was that your car that crashed? No. Do you even own a Tesla? No. Well, then why are you suing? Well, because why not? They have a lot of money and I want it. No, I mean you have to show that you have a basis for this lawsuit, that you suffered a harm. That was the first issue. Now, of course, the judge did decide that the plaintiffs had standing, although it was a little weird because there was something like 400 plaintiffs, but of those 400, only one provided a statement from their employer saying, "Hey, we still want to hire this guy." Like, if you have 400 plaintiffs, why didn't you get 400 of those? Because at the end, luckily, the court said, "Look, we only need one. One was enough." But I don't know, that was a little weird to only have one. But at the end of the day, they did find that the plaintiff had standing, in part because at these because USCIS really couldn't predict how many lotteries there was going to be. They're looking at saying, is there going to be a fourth? Is there not going to be a fourth? So they did find that the plaintiffs had standing to sue. So the second question was, does the registration rule violate the Administrative Procedures Act or the APA? Just- Andrew, in general, what is the APA?
In general, it's the rules that regulate how different administrations within the federal government can operate. So, basically, the broad law gets made by Congress, and then the different administrations come up with their own rules for how to carry out those laws, and those are all regulated under the APA.
And we've seen a lot of lawsuits over the last, I would say, well, start well with the Trump administration that are APA challenges, right? Basically saying you did not follow the correct process to promulgate this rule. Trump administration was almost everything the Trump administration did got shot down because they didn't follow the APA. Now a couple of times they tried to say, well, hey, COVID, we this was an emergency, blah blah blah. And I remember in one of the decisions they were like, COVID started 10 months ago and you just did this. Like, this was a lame excuse. But anyway, the APA is basically saying, hey, you have to follow certain, procedures. Now, the one of the arguments they were making is that the rules allocate visas by alien and not by registration. So they're saying like, well, if it's by alien, it's one per person, whereas the registrations allow multiple per persons, right? And the court basically, this was always a weak argument, and the court basically said, look, a registration and a petition are two separate things, right? A registration is just like step one to eventually filing a petition. That at the end of the day, even though someone can be registered 30 times, they're only counted against the cap once. So your argument of aliens versus registrations doesn't really carry any weight because, again, at the end of the day, yes, I could have 20 registrations, but I only file one petition and I'm only counting against the cap one time. The second sort of issue was, well, was the rule arbitrary and capricious? And this is really where the APA comes into play, right? Where they're saying, well, as part of the APA process, you have to do those notice and comment period, right? Where you put up the proposed rule, you wait for comment from the public, and then you have to address those comments. And of course, there were like over 100 comments that directly called out the potential for fraud, right? And the plaintiffs here are arguing that, hey, you saw those comments and you just kind of ignored them, right? The court's response here is kind of funny. It just says the applicant set the bar too high. It is settled that the agency is not required to discuss every time of fact or opinion included in the submissions made to an informal rulemaking. Basically saying that although you don't think the agency addressed this enough, they're not required to go in and do these comprehensive studies and responses to every single comment, right? They did respond to them. You may not like the response, but the response was sufficient for the APA process. So, I mean, at the end of the day, this was dismissed at the summary judgment stage, right? Which makes it like even more difficult to try to appeal. It seems like the law firms involved with bringing this, they have not committed to filing an appeal yet. It seemed from what I saw, they weren't very hot on the idea of filing an appeal because likelihood of success is pretty low. Although I think they have 60 days, so I think they're gonna wait to see if USCIS publishes how many registrations there were in this year's cap. Because if it goes from like 309,000 to like 500, then maybe they'll appeal. Like just citing that as a number is just like, look at that. So Andrew, where do we go from here? What has USCIS done, if anything, to try to improve the registration process for this year, for fiscal year 2023?
Pretty much the only thing I've seen is that they've added an attestation saying that they further certify, basically requiring one more level from the employers to say that, this is legitimate. And we'll see if that does it.
Well, I love how it's like every form people deal with. The LCA has attestations. The I-129 has attestations. The perm and the prevailing wage, and it's like attestations have never stopped anybody from doing anything. And it's just like I'm always looking at the forms, and they have all these security questions. It's like, have you ever been a terrorist? Yes or no. It's like, dude, if a guy was actually a terrorist, you think he's going to check yes to that box? Like, I think it's hilarious. And they ask him, have you ever been a member of the Nazi Party? And it's like, well, anyway. But anyway, the new attestation basically says, I further certify that this registration reflects a legitimate job offer, and that I or the organization on whose behalf this registration is being submitted have not worked with or agreed to work with another registrant, petitioner, agent, or other individual or entity to submit a registration to unfairly increase chances of selection for the beneficiary or beneficiaries in this submission. So they're basically saying, hey, you promise you're not cheating, right? Right? Of course, who cares, right? The consultancies that are gaming the system are going to keep gaming the system. I have heard some scuttlebutt. This is in no way corroborated that USCI is stepping up and allocating more resources to enforcement on the back end, right? Because they have a whole investigative unit, and that they are putting some more resources and people onto investigating duplicate registrations. Great. I don't think that's really going to be enough to ever meaningfully impact this. I'm sure they're going to come out with a press release of how they nailed, this some consultancies, and are charging 5 people, and it's like, cool, you caught 0.0001%. Bravo. The other 99.9% got away, then are going to keep getting away with it. Now there is a proposed rule we have mentioned before. It's called Modernizing H-1B Requirements and Oversight and Providing Flexibility in the F1 Program. Andrew, what does this rule purport to do regarding H-1B registrations?
So it's hoping to reduce the possibility of misuse and fraud in the H-1B registration system and just kind of bolster the whole system as it is. But ultimately, we don't have the text of that rule yet. Believe it should be available in May.
Yeah, that's a fun one where it's like bolster the registration process. How? Cool. Of course, there's no text yet. We don't know. Um, I'm assuming that they have a draft text, but they, of course, don't want to get to a finalized text until they see the final numbers for fiscal year 2022, right? Because it just closed in February 28th. And so I think they're just finally getting the final numbers and analyzing them and trying to kind of figure out, because one of the great places where we actually get information from the government is in these rules, right? Because usually they're having to justify what they're doing. And if you get, I remember a bunch of the Trump proposed rules, even though the rules themselves were crap. The one great thing about them is, as you dug down through them, there was all of this great info in terms of like how many registrations were there and how many were not, how many were cap exempt, non-cap, or sorry, how many were master's cap, non-master's cap, and they broke it down, and how many were level 1, 2, 3, 4 wage. Like, it was all these numbers breaking down everything, and it was like, oh wow, this is really cool. We can really see how this is playing out. And this may be the spot where we actually start seeing information about fiscal year 2022 registrations and duplicates and all of that is in this rule. Now we're going to have links down below, right, to the lawsuit, right, to this rule. So you can see some of this information for yourself. But I mean, the fact of the matter is that at the end of the day, FY fiscal year 2023 is now open for registration, and it's going to be the same as last year. There's really no meaningful changes this year. Andrew, what's your over under on the number of registrations? Last year was 309,000 registrations. How many do you think? Closest to the actual number without going over. Price is Right rules.
Ooh, close. I'm tempted to go either 400 or 450. I'm going to say 450 because I think COVID numbers have started to drop. Registrations made it easier. People are getting back to work, so uh, I'm going to go
Wait,
450.
so if you're picking 450 here, do I just go $1?
I
Throws
mean,
this
that'd
without
be
going
kind of
throws this without
cheap.
going over.
Are we betting donuts for the office on this?
Yeah, I think I'm still going to stick around 400,000. I mean, that's the biggest increase we have ever seen all time, right? To go from 309 to 400. But I've seen people predicting upwards of 500,000, right? Knowing that they're not changing the system. There really hasn't been any repercussions yet. Now, Andrew, something to mention here is, and I've seen, people asking this on the different forums, is what are the repercussions? So let's say USCIS investigates and they determine that these 20 companies were in fact related and submitting the same, they were registering the same person 20 times, but for what was really only one. They didn't have 20 job offers. They had one job offer. They just did it 20 times. What are the potential repercussions um, if later on, like let's say initially it isn't discovered, you get selected, you file your petition, it gets approved, but then it later comes out that, oh, I mean, just as an example, there's been these guys that there's these consultancies that were essentially helping people get fraudulent OPT, right? They were setting up these quote consultancies that were hiring these people on OPT. And of course, they have to go back and present that to the school, who then enters it in the Chavez database. And then all of a sudden they found out that they were all fake. These were all fake offer letters. Um, what's the potential repercussion to someone here if they engage in this and it gets uncovered?
So I'm trying to think. There's obviously two. The first one is going to be you're getting investigated every time you're involved in anything immigration wise. And also there's the immediate repercussions with this attestation. Any attestation, if you're found to be willfully committing fraud, I mean, there's that perjury, fraud, the fines, so on and so forth. With the registration, though, I'm not sure what specific penalties are related to a fake registration. I know for others, there's any number of fines.
Well, there's the sort of detail, like what are they actually going to charge me with on a legal basis, and I don't necessarily know. The main thing that as the person who, as the employee, as the foreign national, you're looking at a fraud misrepresentation charge. And I'm not talking about a criminal charge. I'm talking about, within the immigration context. If you get suspected or charged with fraud or a misrepresentation, you're permanently barred from the United States. Um, and it's a really low bar for them to prove this. I mean, in general, they only have to have a reason to believe. They don't have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt. Um, and again, here you're trying to argue a negative because you're basically having to prove, well, I didn't know, like this company registered me and I didn't know it wasn't a legitimate job offer. And I've seen so many people try to make that I didn't know argument, and USCIS just doesn't care. And it's like, well, how do you prove you didn't know? Like it may be that you didn't know, but it's impossible to prove that you didn't know. Unless these guys were like literally sending you actual paperwork, like, oh yeah, we have this job and here's your offer letter and sign. But none of these guys are doing that, right? Um, and I remember we were talking to someone recently that got caught up in one of these fake OPT universities, and they're like, like, well, what can we do? What can we do? What can we do? And we're like, well, dude, I mean, you had to have not known because you didn't. You, otherwise, you would have shown up for work, and right? And they got really quiet pretty quickly and we realized, yeah, they knew. But I mean, the main thing is a fraud misrepresentation charge, and those can stick to you at any point in the process. So let's say you've had an H-1B for 6 years and then you file for residency and you're now going in for your adjustment interview, and only then does this kind of come out. Can they deny your adjustment and put you into like deportation proceedings? Yep. Doesn't matter, all that came afterwards. If they think you committed fraud back in the day, they'll unravel everything at you. Um, then of course there's like, are there criminal penalties? Not so much I don't think they would really come criminally after like the foreign nationals, but criminally they could go after the people who were the fake companies, right?
Right.
Um, um, those type of people they could come after, not just immigration wise, but criminally. So I mean, look, it's the consequences are dire. Now, again, people are going to say, well, my odds of getting caught are pretty low. That's true. But if you do get caught, the consequences are extremely severe. Now, again, there's the whole difference between, well, what about kind of a fake registration versus a sort of fraudulent petition? Like, oh, hey, I got registered by this like legit company, but also registered by all these unlegitimate companies. But the one that got selected was the legit one, and they're the ones that actually filed the H-1B petition. That's a little bit more of a gray area. But like I said, I've seen too many cases where all they had to do was suspect that you were in the same room as the bad things going on. Again, this is not criminal court. They don't have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt. They just have to reason to believe, right? They almost don't have to prove anything. They can just say, "Well, I think you did this," and bam, you're screwed. And by think means if they determine company A was a fraudster and they go through all the registrations, they're just going to hit all those people. They're not going to like reach out to you or ask or, hey, no. I mean, they're just going to hit all of them, and then it's on you to try to fight it back. So this is a fun time. Now, remember, if we won't know the results of the lottery probably till around March 31st. USCIS is their operations arm and their PR arm are not in sync at all, meaning the accounts will probably update and then they'll finally send the announcement that they actually did the lottery, I don't know, a day later. They don't like update the results in the system and then at the same time send out the press release. So what's probably going to happen is the attorneys and company reps are going to start getting these generic emails that come from the USCIS system, just saying, "Hey, there's been an update to your case." And of course, you go, "What case?" And then you log in, and hopefully the system hasn't broken because every time they update it, it breaks. It broke over the weekend, right? Because they updated it to change all of the cases that hadn't been selected from submitted to not selected. So every year when they're done, they do that update. Of course, it broke the system. We couldn't log in. And we were getting these updates on Saturday and Sunday, and of course, they didn't officially announce it until like Monday or Tuesday. Again, anyway. What's going to happen is probably the first thing that's going to happen is the attorneys and the company rep are going to get generic emails. We're all going to try to log in. System may be broken, so there may be a period whereby people are freaking out. Did I get selected? And the attorney's like, I don't know. And they're like, my attorney's lying to me. It's like, actually, no. The attorney may be trying to log in and just can't. But then you'll log in and you'll be able to go through all your cases and see whether or not it still shows as submitted or it's changed to selected, right? So obviously if it's submitted, you weren't selected, but you'll still be available for a second or third round. If it says selected, congratulations. You now have 90 days to file your full H-1B petition starting on April 1st. Andrew, any comments on the H-1B case or current registration?
No, I mean, just remember the 18th noon Eastern time, not Central or Pacific. Also, I think we were told to let everyone know that there's a couple of the links are going to be included in the description below.
Yeah, so again, I say good luck to all. There is going to be rampant fraud. Obviously, we discourage people from trying to engage in that. You may get away with it in the short term. It could come back to bite you hard in the long term. But we got to keep our ears open to this rule that's coming down to see what's there. What is it going to be where USCIS is really taking this seriously and they're going to put in some significant safeguards to stop this? Or is it just going to be window dressing where the, security theater, like when you go through the airport, right, where they're just like, hey, we're going through all this stuff to make you feel safe, but we're not actually doing anything that's actually making you safer. So we're going to have to see what this rule is. Also, there is some, what's the Durbin Grassley bill out there? Something maybe we'll dive into in the future, but these are two senators, one's a Republican, one's a Democrat, that have been pushing H-1B reform. And we'll have to see if that ever gets any traction, but that's a more comprehensive reform to kind of the whole program. But until then, hey, stay tuned. As always, if there's an update, we'll be here to keep you up to date. Also, check out our series of videos on all the different non-immigrant visas, and all the employment-based immigrant categories, right? So if you're thinking about a visa, thinking about residency, we should have a visa that addresses, or should have a video that addresses one of the things that you're thinking about. Go to our website if you want to see more about us. Also schedule a consultation to talk more in depth about your specific case. Download our app. It's the Law Pilot Guardian app, available for Android and iOS. Lots of useful features in there that we're continually adding to. But until then, thank you for tuning in. If you're registering for the H-1B lottery, best of luck to you, and we'll see you guys later.